and refresh your memory about that. So I was saying right before we went to break, the commissioner was talking about collaboratives that they formed, and we're talking about that. Of course, one of the things that we do really well around county is cooperate and collaborate with one another. That's what we've tried to really show today, is how all of these partners really build community and help our community to build the plans that we need in order to be successful to get through what could be very tumultuous times as it relates to wildfire in the future. And that's why we're so excited to have Pam Wilson with Walkers and Collaboratives, I'm sorry, Coalitions.
Coalitions and Collaboratives.
Coalitions and Collaboratives here today. Pam's got a long time, done a lot of work with the Forest Service in wildfire, and this group that she leads now really does focus on bringing people together to have these conversations about how we move forward with community wildfire protection plans. So I'm going to turn over to Pam for a facilitated conversation and you all to see where we're going with our plan. Pam, turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I realize I'm a new face to most of you, and I don't run coalitions and collaboratives. I work with them. And one of our main goals really, and we're based here in Colorado, but we are a national NGO. And so we are working really hard to build capacity in the mitigation arena. A lot of us got started, I got started back in the early 2000s with this, and there was no training for mitigation specialists. There was no training on how to work with your community. So we are really trying to build up training, opportunities, best practices that we can share with up and coming mitigation specialists, because it is such an important job. And the money that has been poured into fire suppression far outweighs the money that has been paid into wildfire mitigation. So we are really trying to enhance things. So we have a national grant funding program that we give out. It's primarily geared towards building capacity. So we want to help organizations, whether it be a fire department, whether it be an NGO, whether it be county government. We're really working to try and increase the capacity so that there's more people on the ground to do this work. We've also developed a mitigation best practices training, which has become really popular. We used to offer it once or twice a year, where now the requests are coming in constantly, so that we're offering it more like 4 to 6 times a year. Sometimes it's a 2-day training, sometimes it's a 6-week independent paced training. So we can offer it in a variety of different ways. But that's really one of our goals with coalitions and collaboratives, is to really increase the capacity of mitigation practitioners. So anyway, one of the things, I think this afternoon has been a really good setup to what we want to get to now. I'm not going to talk at you, you're going to talk to me. And several folks have mentioned that it's time to revise the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And we wanted to start to have that discussion. They're in the process of refining the request for proposals so that they can go out and hire a contractor to do this work. And so there's a committee that has developed some objectives. And as we looked at them and talked about it, once I was brought on board, we said, you know, these are really pretty good objectives. It doesn't mean that if something is missing from, and these are 3 of the 6 that have been developed, the council is certainly open and would take suggestions. We don't want to wordsmith these today. And so we're actually changing the topic a little bit here. Instead of what do we want from the CWPP, what we'd like you to tell us is how can we get there? What can the council do to help meet some of these objectives in the CWPP? And so I want to go through the 6 of them really quickly, and then there's 3 that we've picked out that we'd really like to get some input from you on. So the first one, create an actionable and user-friendly plan that reaches a broad audience. Number 2, promote inclusive county-wide participation that results in a plan that reflects community needs and priorities. Number 3, provide a local ground truthed assessment of community values at risk, key vulnerabilities, and a wildland urban interface map for Routt County. Number 4, develop prioritized recommendations for specific actions to include the following types: forest management, fuels treatment projects, wildfire mitigation policies. We heard about that from the folks today that talked about the built environment. Education outreach activities, critical infrastructure protection, and strategic plans and partnerships. Number 5, identify a strategy for implementing recommendations that include key considerations, roles and responsibilities, and potential funding and technical assistance opportunities. And number 6, improve public awareness of wildfire risk, knowledge of effective wildfire risk reduction, and willingness to take and support mitigation actions. So we're going to look at numbers 2, 5, and 6. And we just want to get some feedback from you of different ways that you think these things could be accomplished. You heard a lot today about conditions that have changed over the years. You've heard about drought. You've heard about some policies and procedures that could be put into place. But then you also just heard from Commissioner Felt the importance of that broad community engagement and the buy-in from the community. So thinking about this first one, how do we promote inclusive countywide participation? So the council is really looking for some suggestions from you. What are some ways that they can make sure that everybody in the county has a say and gets included? And this is just going to be an open discussion. So if you just kind of raise your hand, somebody's going to come running at you with a microphone. And I know it's the end of the day, but it's going to be a lot more fun to talk about this than to just have us talk at you.
We're not making it here, you know.
That's a good threat. You got a thirsty gentleman in the back.
But will you give me a beer if I take the microphone? Well, certainly this forum right here is how we get inclusive countywide participation. It's open to the public, and here we are asking questions, and everybody talks and hears and gets an understanding.
Yeah, I should know the answer to this question, but I don't, so I'm going to ask it, given my position. But what would be, what does success look like there? Because it's hard, but this is great. You know, there's this many people here, and you've stayed through a long, sort of technical at times discussion, and we're still here. So some of us are talking in the hall saying, you know, there seems to be an energy building. I mean, Chaffey County's done some wonderful things, about half our size, but having been involved in a lot of public meetings over the years, if there's no controversy, sometimes nobody shows up. And I'm not suggesting that we create controversy, but I'm wondering what success, you know, I'm wondering aloud what success will look like in terms of getting that participation, particularly in a community. And I can't speak to Chaffey County, but Steamboat proper, maybe less so than before the pandemic. We're a lot of people who don't live here. They own a lot of property here, but they don't live here. So that I think that adds a challenge to getting involvement. But anyway, I'll throw that back. And maybe there's a rhetorical question for the council. It's like we should think about what success is.
Definitely, that's something that you do need to define for yourselves. But I think, you know, I think this one gets at it. This is very objective, John, because it's saying we as a council recognize that we need community participation. But what's the best way to do that?
So I'd like to comment on that. So I'm Tim Walker, the EFLP. I want to make two comments. One, John, I appreciate you saying that because I think the question of what is successful participation is a good one to answer. And I agree with you, this is a really good turnout, so maybe this is a good model. On that, there are lots of groups that are meeting regularly, and I think the county plan model is a good one too, where you take the plan to those groups and get their input. So rather than trying to create a whole new set of really active engagement in a single group, you know, go to the Strawberry Park Homeowners Association and get their input, go to the, you know, the Purchase of Development Rights Program. And there's all these different things going on, and we should be tapping those groups that are already meeting regularly and taking advantage of them. But the other comment I'll make on Chaffey County, because I'm pretty familiar with their vision, Chaffey County, and it was great to have Greg speak about that. But remember that their community engagement was really over this big ballot measure, which included land conservation and fire mitigation, among several other things. So they were talking about really big issues in Chaffey County, not just focused on a community wildfire protection plan. So I don't think we need to aim for that necessarily. So that's just I just want to kind of echo what you're saying, John, that, you know, maybe what we need is just the people who really care about wildfire to show up and contribute to the wildfire protection plan, but not necessarily everybody in the county needs to be engaged.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, to kind of build on both comments, but also what the inclusivity of, I thought what was fascinating what Greg shared was the outreach, the ability literally to go to door, to have implementation program that took away the need necessary for the community to really go out and find it. It really was brought to them. So I think amidst him, what you're sharing or going and having the subsets and having these groups that know their communities, that know their subdivisions, that know their HOAs, and then being able to further take that literally to their doorstep. I think that was a pretty big statement to see their success. There wasn't a lot of, it made that integration and that ability for the community to get involved that much easier. So I think that much easier.
So just a couple of comments. Number one, John, you're absolutely right. We have a lot of second homeowners in this community, but I have to say many of them are as engaged, if not more engaged, than some of our regular citizens. You know, we'll get phone calls or comments, well, what's going on with this and what's happening here? So when they own property in Routt County, many of them really deeply care about Routt County and what goes on there. So part of it is the messaging. How do we get that messaging out? And another comment, Evergreen, what they did is they found an old fire truck and they repainted it, repurposed it, and it's almost like a hook. And they had it in kind of the town square at one point for a community meeting. And now HOAs and communities in different neighborhoods are reaching out saying, hey, can you bring that to our place? And so we might look for some sort of a hook like that. But
it's a great idea.
We found
Did you hear that? Chuck just said he's donating a 1950 fire truck for the cause. Thank you, Chuck. That's great. It's amazing what you do when you're chief now, isn't it? That is fantastic.
careful lightning based.
Oh no, it's back here. Here, Lena. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm more of a question than a comment, but with the Chaffey model, I'm curious how they were able to determine those high-risk zones and how we might be able to do that in our community. It's not like a needs assessment or just, I mean, like the idea of going to community, I don't know, door-to-door, HOA to HOA, but gathering that data.
Well, I think a lot of that data was probably something that CFRI, the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, helped with because they do a lot of modeling. And so when you do that, you're looking at fuel types, you're looking at the historic fire regime. They're probably taking into account drought and all of those kinds of things now and developing that high risk map. So, and I think the Forest Service probably has some similar tools for doing those types of activities as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's a lot of tools out there right now. We're kind of in a spectrum now with a lot of this. We have what's called pods, potential operation delineations, and that does a lot. That's not 100%. I was hoping Tony was here, but just right on the questions. Yeah, but that when I look at that map and everything, that looks very, very similar to the pod concept, and they are the ones that made the pods concept. So I'm assuming it's that, but there is a lot of opportunity now out there to do more.
And I don't want to speak for Tony because he can answer the question when he comes back, but he would probably say that we don't need the level of modeling that he did for Chaffey County to define the priorities in get-go. So we'll see if he's...
Why do you say that?
Huh?
Why do you say that?
It's a lot of it's done.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the question that was brought up before brought up a really good point. If you want to get participation, you don't need to have everybody's participation. Hit those high priority areas. You can get some modeling done. A lot of the modeling is, some of it the Forest Service already has. That's some really good places to start in your high risk areas, and then you know where to focus. Some of that might come out with the wildfire protection plan analysis as folks need. But I mean, that's a great starting ground because you're not going to be able to treat every acre in Routt County, but focus on the ones that really need it the most and find out if you get the buy-in from those people that are affected. That's kind of a really good tool.
What about like with the you mentioned that they focus on areas that are already.
Yeah, that was a little bit of the talk, when we talked about the Forest Services plans, the BLM plans. We have some of that in Routt County, but maybe some of these needs will drive some more areas that we can start implementing and start getting out ahead of this as well. So I'm kind of hoping that's how we can tie in to help, folks in this area. And I'm sure that's the Forest Services goals.
Other comments on number 2, how do we promote inclusive countywide participation that results in climate reflects community needs and priorities?
It's almost like.
Oh, and I'm going to insist that everybody use the microphone because it's being recorded. We cannot hear you otherwise.
A lot of big chunks of the county don't even know what a CWPP is before we start promoting participation, or that it's being developed, even if they do know what that is. So I think we also need to get the message out there that this is happening, because there has been some conversations like SCOA, for example, developing their own CWPP. And a lot of them are like, what is a CWPP? Oh wait, did you know that the county is developing this, so you don't have to pay for that? So that messaging potentially needs to take a step backwards as well before we jump to how to promote inclusivity as well.
A thought that I had for the inclusivity, so we struggle, it seems like, to reach north, south, and west Routt a lot of times, and I've just been participating a lot more in youth outreach and have found that people love their children more than anything else. And I think going through schools and youth education events like that really gets the parents and community engaged. And I think that that's something that we could try harder in this regard, at least to promote that large level of awareness.
That's a great comment, and I think that's also really helpful for the Routt County Council as it continues to grow and form, because they're also talking about hiring an executive director, and that means setting up more programs and that sort of thing. So that type of feedback also feeds really well into that, not just into the CWPP. So thank you for that.
And kids love 1954 fire trucks. Just saying. So Tony has just joined us again. Tony, we're not pointing out that you're gone, but 2 years. Timing wasn't great. So there were some questions about the work you did in Chaffee County in determining what those high priority areas were. We're talking about doing something similar in Routt County and hoping that we have some of that data already determined. Can you provide some insight on that?
Yeah. So there's it's basically a computer modeling effort using GIS, and a lot of the data are fairly readily available. And so it's actually kind of easy part. The more challenging part is pulling the local knowledge out of people that have been around your forest conditions and especially your fire conditions. And so I think one of the things that Greg talked about in terms of like day-long meetings was a lot of the data that's off the shelf that is used. It doesn't matter who's using it, if it's a consultant or a government agency or researcher, they're all the same. There's only so much data on these kinds of wildfire risk, how you calculate the natural risk. No one's doing anything different. What you need to do as a community is assert yourself to say, these maps don't reflect the reality that we're seeing on the ground. And I think that was the more important magic of Secret Sauce was that engage people. And once they understood what it is that these data are trying to reflect, then immediately they started like pointing these out. So one of the things that was occurring, I think John pointed this out this morning about spruce fir and their fire return intervals of every 600 years. These are just artifacts of just like math, right? The fire can happen anytime. We saw that with East Charleston, okay? And so when we look at fire behavior maps now in the high elevation, we need to completely change those calculations. And those of you that have been up there on that middle fork, on the circle fires, and all these big fires, and the Beaver Creek fires, you need to provide that input into those models, and then you can kind of dial them out and tweak them. And all of a sudden, if we saw the original priority map that was just using off-the-shelf data, those priorities are completely different. And then after about 6 months of meetings, almost like every week, it was a long process. That was the priority map, and it reflected the local reality. And that was really important. Okay? And so those are things that we can do. We want to work with the state foresters because they're staffing up a bunch of folks that are going to be working on wildfire protection plans. We can work with consultants. It doesn't matter. We're a university organization, so we don't have intellectual property over these models. And we want to be able to work with all of you to be able to localize that. And then you own it, right? So they now own all this GIS data. We haven't been in Chaffee County for a year, and they're still working on that stuff and updating that kind of work. Matt?
Just what kind of inputs did you gather in this dialogue that was different than what you pull out of existing databases or data sets?
The first was your values at risk, what we call HVR, highly valued resources and assets. And again, a lot of these are pulled off the shelf, and most of them have to do with where your house is. That's easy, right? You can pull off Google Earth and all that kind of stuff. We can pull off Zillow, but those may not be, those are important, right? They may not be the most important assets. So we had to go in and we had to identify where are your most important winter range bighorn sheep. That's what people want to know, right? Where are your elk cabin areas? Because if those go away, a big part of your economy goes. And those can't be replaced. You can build houses, those kinds of things. If you lose that, if you lose a lot of those critical assets, so those were the more important local community aspect. Where are those seeps and springs that contribute into creeks that end up having that clean water supply for your fisheries, right? So River Valley. They wanted to know what's the fire mitigation we need to do around seeps and springs, because if you lose those, your fisheries go So those are really important. There's no off-the-shelf GIS graders. So it was going to be people coming to the table on paper maps, putting those things down, attributing them, and then talking about what would a fire do. Some of these things can actually use fire. So you might actually want to put a little bit of fire in there and manage that fire in a different way, but it can't stand a certain other type of fire. And then we need to work on mitigating fuels and suppressing.
Excellent, Tony. Pam, I'm going to turn back to you, except Chuck, you had one more.
Well, I was just going to comment that I think that's the question.
That's the question we're asking with how do we get that inclusivity? It's not necessarily how do we get 50 neighbors in this area to come talk with us. It's how do we get those people to talk to us, right? How do we engage that knowledge? How do we find that knowledge? How do we engage that knowledge, right? Because you're absolutely right. Data, computer-generated data, we can get. We know we can get that. But when we do the outreach, how do we find those people? That's really the question I think we need to dive into. And as much as I love to drive around an old fire truck and have people come talk to me, I don't know if that's I mean, we need those people as well. We also need that next level. Sounds to me like the budget for beer is going up because there's going to be a lot of meetings coming up in the future that we're trying to get people to.
Okay, just speaking from this education bubble that I live in as the Apoteca, getting across to the kids will reach the parents directly because they go home and they talk about it. But also speaking about this, getting information, engaging those high school students in education and taking them out and showing them what kind of work needs to be done to value their own community is helping them buy into this Colorado or this Routt County wildfire protection right here, because this is where they live in the first place. So not only are you getting the buy-in from the kids, but they're also about to become adults. So this is their county.
So I think that was actually a great segue into the next objective, because we're talking about implementation strategies. So maybe we need an implementation strategy that focuses on that education. So that's a great point. And it's a lot of this stuff will overlap in that way. I'm not sure that teaching high school kids about community wildfire protection plans is going to seem really exciting. But I think if you can get them out there on the ground and talk defensible space, yes, you've got an audience for sure. So, so implementation. How hard, how easy is it to get people to do work? If all of a sudden you've got this list of activities in a plan, how does the council carry that forward to the community? How do all of you carry that forward to the community and start moving towards implementation?
Money.
Money helps, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm Emilio Giovanni, I'm the Morrison Creek General Manager. Access to funding is what's going to get people out there. We represent a small district. We have a small HOA, stagecoach, we're actually pretty large in size, but we have no access to funding. We know where the danger zones are. We know what we need to do. You know, the areas that we need to mitigate. How do we access funding? How do we get money out there for people to start mitigating? Thanks, Todd. Frank Alfone, I'm the General Manager of Alfone Water. And having been through the Fish Creek Wildfire Critical Community Protection Plan, I have to say that 6 times. What comes out of this plan is going to be I think, a fairly substantial set of recommendations and activities that you want to try to implement to your question here. And
what I found to be one of the challenges is where do you start? How do you actually categorize those and prioritize those specific recommendations? And then to take it one step further, who are the entities that can help you implement? Whether it's engineers, whether it's consultants, whether it's county officials. So if there's a way to create a flow chart or some sort of matrix on how you take a recommendation from start to finish, there's got to be resources to do the work, but if there's a way to identify a map forward, that helps that person, whoever that might be, that's got to implement that project, know where to start, know who to call, and then to Gio's point, where do you get the funding to help you do that
Just the funding piece, I think we have a lot of people from Chief County. If we can get some local recurring funding dollars from one source or another, then we can leverage that in a huge way. And there's so much money coming down the pipeline that we really need to be able to provide match locally in order to take advantage of that. So I think that's one of the places to start, to figure out how we generate money from the community to then pull more money in.
First, Todd got a running list of documents, a half page, and surprisingly less than half of it is federal records. So, to number 5 here, I just want to say, I can say the Forest Service is excited to be engaged in this and ready to work with the community here and partners to work on this effort. We can hit a lot of these things. We already are always looking at our landscape, right? Our piece of the map. And so we have a good idea of where we see priority treatment areas. We have things that are covered by NEPA or things that aren't. And we have capacity with providing data. We've got quite a bit of data that can go with some of these GIS exercises and other things. We've got technical systems. So we can contribute pretty well on a lot of these pieces. And to the funding piece has been mentioned, which is obviously a key piece of being able to actually implement something. Some funding sources are geared towards federal efforts, and some are geared towards non-federal efforts. So certainly having federal agencies and local governments and other nonprofits and organizations, we can reach out and a lot of those different funding sources. It's not always, not each opportunity is open to every partner.
I think I'd like to just mention, Matt Holmes said earlier today, plan, be ready to receive the money. And so part of this planning effort really is thinking towards that end goal. You could be talking about who's going to, part of this is not just implementing recommendations, but who's going to do it. So stepping forward and saying, I have these resources that can help out, we can help with modeling, and we have this equipment. Those are all ways that you start getting to that ultimate plan of saying, we have shelf-ready projects. Now we can go search for the funding. And it'll make it so much easier when you start applying for grant funding to have gone through this process. So.
Kind of beating through the question there.
I'm sorry.
No, you're great. That's great. I was just going to say too, I think one of the things is like they did in Shady County, there you go, sorry, is the prioritization. Because I think it's really easy for each, just like Michael said, it's easy for the Forest Service to prioritize something. But now we're competing against maybe the BLM in a different part of Routt County. So if you can work together, prioritize in the same areas and work there, not only will your funding be easier too, because is it CAFA, right? Yeah, that is the one, if you're within a mile of Forest Service, you can put into the grants through state forestry and you can get money. So before US Forest Service has a project within a mile of that, then you can get money. So there's a funding source. So if you can work together, and then also you're not competing. So Oak Creek isn't competing with North Routt for the exact same money, right? We're working together to go, okay, 2021, we're gonna go wherever, and then we're gonna go 2022 down here, or, you know, your years. So if you can get those plans rotated around and really prioritize and be a little strategic at it, the funding, all that stuff is way easier to come across.
So the first wildfire conference that we had, after the 2 days, I think that the product that was crystal clear to all of us was we needed to create a wildfire council, which we've done. Right now, what is becoming crystal clear to me is we need to get an executive director.
I totally agree.
That can go and process and do all this. We're volunteers, we don't have the time, energy. That's what I'm getting at.
So when I think about implementation, I think about boots on the ground, people out there, because ultimately that's the product, that's what people are going to be looking at, that's what is impacting sensitive areas and wildlife and neighborhoods and getting the job done. I mean, it's important to have guiding documents so that that's done well and effectively and efficiently, but to give a pitch to like private contractors, it'd be great to have their knowledge that involved in the conversation, because they're the ones that are going to be out there assessing the slope and understanding how to get timber out of there and like it's impactful. So, you know, it's really, again, stems to this kind of ground up process as well that should be tightly connected to that planning and funding process.
So just on the topic, I can set me up a little bit on the topic of executive director and wildfire council. So, you know, that's definitely a goal for the board, and we've been working towards that. You know, funding is clearly an issue. We were hoping, at some point, we're hoping for 2A funding or other sources of local funds to support Wildfire Council and to bring in executive director. But really, we want the Wildfire Council to do this kind of work, to be the hub for pushing on the community and doing and helping with CWPP, and that's really where we want to go. And I think it'd be wonderful, just to kind of throw a suggestion out there, it'd be wonderful to pull together some type of, you know, CWPP task force from people here that could help the Wildfire Council take a very specific role, like Tony and other individuals who have a lot of experience with this can be part of that task force, so that everything that we figure out today, we're talking about today, we can then implement and have specific people. And when you create a task force, you have specific people who have a sense of responsibility to keep it moving forward. So those people in that task force won't let this drop, they'll keep pushing on it.
I think that's a great suggestion, and if I could just say from my experience, and I've worked on, I don't know, 6 countywide plans and probably 23, 24 subdivision level plans. The ones that are developed by the community internally are so much more successful than the ones that are done strictly by a contractor. And so the more of you that have some energy to put into helping to create this plan, I think the more successful you'll be. And I'm not knocking any contractors, but you don't get the same buy-in when it's a contractor creating it. We actually had a group of neighborhood ambassadors that used to write most of our CWPPs. These were volunteers in their subdivisions. And yes, they had support from the State Forest Service, they had support from the US Forest Service, they had support from the BLM, and they had support from my NGO. But they took the lead. They organized their community. They helped, they got people to meetings. If you don't take that effort, you never know. So it's like, yes, the council could step up. They could say, we're going to run all the community involvement and let the contractor do the technical writing. There's different ways you can approach your CWPP. So just be open to that and thinking about that and think about, as the suggestions made, you know, what can you help with it is learning effort. And
It's too bad Pam lives so far away. Or she could be a great executive director.
And I'll be back in September. I think it's up to you. I don't want to cut next time short for.
I have one. Back here. Please. So I've been sitting here listening to all this stuff. I have to tell you, especially watching the Chaffey County thing, you know, one of those polygons involves one of my big power lines too. I'm stationed in Montrose, Colorado. I've worked for Western Area Power for 8 years, and I travel all over to do this kind of thing. So I come here, I go to Grand Lake, they've got one going, Chaffey County's got one going. I'm going to Longmont next week, you know, and it's all centered around, I think communities are finally realizing that there's power lines through their community. And everybody's got power. So invite your rural electrics to the table, because everybody's plugged in there, you know, and we're all, so it's a really good way to get everybody to the table too. And, you know, like I said, with the little project we're doing out behind Emerald, one of the reasons why I got involved in that is because I knew somebody that was heading the project. So the more I'm out there, the more people I get to know. And it becomes like, I become almost a member of every community where the power lines traverse, right? Even though I live in Montrose, I come here and help out here because I've got 2 power lines running through here. So don't forget that.
Yeah,
that's a good way.
And I would say this is just the start of this conversation. We were hoping that we'd get some input that would help as the council gets ready to put out this request for proposals. There are some comment boards in the back where they're looking for some feedback on values that are most important to you. It's all just part of the information gathering. So don't think that the conversation ends with today and that a contractor's going to come in and write a plan and you're not going to have any more say. You're going to have plenty more opportunity to participate. We just wanted to get the conversation started. So thank you all for your input. And with that, I think Matt gets to wrap it up.
And let's